welcome to Scientista Podcast live from COP30 in Belém, Brazil. I'm here with Xiye Bastida, who is the executive director and co-founder of the Re-Earth Initiative. She's a youth climate activist and speaks up for Indigenous peoples and has been here many times before. So how do you see this COP happening? How has it felt for youth voices? What's the vibe of this COP so far?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Well, this is my sixth COP. I started COPs when I was 17 in Madrid, and I didn't know what was going on then. It was kind of, we were just the youth movement wanting to change things, wanting to raise our voice through actions. But as the COPs went by, I understood that it is very important that we know what's happening in negotiations because they are negotiating our lives, our futures. So I feel so much more prepared as the years went along. And this year we're focusing heavily on just transition and what it means to have not just the energy transition, but a food transition and an economic transition. So that's really one of the main focuses that the different constituencies have at this COP. And it's just baffling, to be honest, that a lot of the countries, especially in the global north, keep blocking meaningful rights and justice for constituencies for a long time.
Is that something that the Brazil presidency can help move forward? Obviously, they have some interest here in seeing some of that blockage get unblocked, having some of that, seeing change really happen. I know that's been a theme for President Lula.
So a lot of countries are trying to block a cover decision. And I haven't seen that before. And I think the Brazilian government can be central in making sure that the cover decision actually happens so that we can have this at least centralized document where we know what's going to happen, what's going on. And I think that the Brazilian government, hosting the COP is not easy, first of all. Hosting it in Belém is not easy.
It's a huge logistical challenge. Yesterday it rained, and it rained inside some of the tents.
Yeah.
So, it's hard to put on a big meeting like this.
Yeah.
But really, the important stuff is the work that gets done behind the scenes where the delegates are doing all this deep negotiation on a long text of decisions that help shape the future of climate action.
Yes, what we're really pushing for as the constituencies is the Belém action mechanism, which for the global just transition. And
just transition from an extractive, greenhouse gas emitting, polluting economy and society to one that is, help our audience to understand what that means.
So a just transition from an extractive economy that relies on polluting and destroying our critical ecosystems, our forests, the responsible systems that have caused the climate crisis, and which we still subsidize, by the way. We subsidize fossil fuels today by more than $2 trillion a year, which is like an insane amount. If it was about 2023, the subsidies to fossil fuels were about $1.7 trillion a year, which is around $11 million every minute.
That's a huge number.
$11 million per minute.
An awful lot of subsidy for a group of industries that are actually making the planet sicker and hurting people where they live.
Yeah. And so the just transition is from this system to one that is renewable, one where we can live closer to our food systems, our land, one where Indigenous peoples have rights, workers have rights. There's care work recognized as a central part of the future that we want to get to, right? Because the just transition is really like, how do we get from A to B? And if we don't have B imagined, then we cannot get there. But if we don't have the steps drawn out, then it's really just going to be wishful thinking.
And that's why that decision document matters, because it lays out some of these steps and it actually gives a vision for what that just transition will look like and helps people then to work towards it.
Yeah. One of the biggest issues we have is that so many times in trying to get to renewables, trying to get our energy grid switched over, we're actually replicating the same extractive systems and harmful systems
through critical minerals mining,
lithium, where solar and wind farms are placed. we just cannot do that. If we really want transformation, we cannot solve the crisis with the same thinking that caused it, which is why we're pushing for the inclusion of indigenous knowledge, indigenous rights, the gender action
Gender
plan,
voices,
gender
yes.
voices.
Well, let's talk about nature, because that was something that I spent a lot of time on when I was in the U.S. government. This is a nature COP, I think. So far, they've talked an awful lot more about nature, nature-based solutions, adaptation. Tell us whether you're seeing that too. Is this going to be known as the nature COP, the adaptation COP, the implementation COP, where we kind of turn a corner from just talking about mitigation to adaptation?
It is extremely important that we talk about adaptation. If you think about mitigation, we have the 1.5 degree target,
Right.
but we don't have a target for adaptation, and we don't even have language for it. What does adaptation mean? Does it mean all major cities that could be flooded or too hot to live in need to be moved by 2075? Like,
Right.
have you ever heard anything like that before?
A lot of places don't want to move, even when they know they're faced with climate challenges.
Yeah.
So it is really hard. I think in different places want to adapt different ways, but nature is a huge part. I mean, you were talking about how when we make this transition, if we do it in harmony with nature, if we don't override nature and natural systems, we'll get the double benefit of climate and nature as well.
Yes. Nature is such an integral part of basically like getting to all of our goals. I mean, I love to think of mangroves and how mangroves can not
I love mangroves. Yeah.
As a carbon sink, they can also act as resilience and protection for coastal communities. From storms.
They also are a huge place where food is grown. Fish are abundant in healthy mangrove ecosystems.
Yeah, so it's just one example of how one ecosystem can really tackle mitigation, adaptation, protection, prevent loss and damage. And that is the type of ecological knowledge that we need to bring into these spaces. And the solutions, we don't like I personally don't like this nature-based solutions framework, because it has been in a way co-opted by a lot of the private industries where, for example, a biodiversity credit basically signals that we can take one species and change it for another. And I'm not saying it couldn't work. I'm just saying the way that it's been done isn't really recognizing the richness of our ecosystems and biodiversity, where if you have a whole carbon market that's relying on a plantation-based forest, then that's not a forest, and that's not going to help our ecosystems thrive. So I think what we are here for is being really clear about what diversity means, biodiversity, that how biodiversity means richness for drawing down carbon, for mitigation, for adaptation, for preventing water runoff, for ensuring that species can go on, ensuring our traditions can stay. Cultures.
Indeed. So let's talk about some of the Indigenous peoples who are here. Tell us about some of the stories. You're a great storyteller. Tell us some of the stories that people might not get a chance to hear, people out there who are listening. And our Indigenous peoples, because we're in the Amazon, we're sort of in their backyard. Are they getting a seat at the table finally?
Well, I don't think we will know until the decision comes out, because Indigenous peoples are always here.
They are always here. They are. And Brazil's always had a representative in their delegation, at least one or two, who comes from these Indigenous communities in the Amazon.
Yeah. And this COP, it was conceived from the very beginning to be a place for Indigenous peoples and for the voices of Indigenous peoples. And I know that there's a parallel summit happening called the People's Summit, Los Povos, where they're joining together 3,000 people from civil society, Indigenous communities, to make sure that we also have something to say as civil society on what we expect from our governments. And we know Indigenous peoples protect 85% of global biodiversity.
They do. They're amazing stewards of the land, and they think in terms of generations, not just about today profit margins, right? They're always thinking ahead.
And I mean, when we are raised with that intergenerational thinking, what we're doing now makes absolutely no sense. Because our climate models go till the year 2100. And that's when my grandchildren are gonna have my age.
Yeah, you're speaking my language. I'm a new grandmother.
And we're not building the world as if we love the people who will be born then. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Like, we really are in a time that is so bizarre to me. where we have issues so massive going on, and we don't have our governments, our politicians, the corporations don't have the courage to say, you know what, we messed up. We didn't do what was right, and now it's the time to turn around. And I'm actually a planetary guardian, which we are ambassadors for the Planetary Boundary Science.
Planetary Guardians and about Re-Earth. Tell us about the organizations you're associated with and what they're hoping to accomplish here.
So with the Planetary Boundary Science, it's this framework of 9 boundaries that measure the health of the planet.
Yes.
And we have reached now 7 of the 9 boundaries, including the ocean acidification boundary that we announced just in September. And that doesn't mean that we have reached tipping points. It means that we have reached the safe operating zone of the planet, which could lead to tipping points. So, for example, we have reached the ocean acidification boundary, which has now caused the tipping point of coral reefs,
which are at real risk of going away completely.
Yeah, and it's, I think a lot about tipping points also culturally. Like, what happens when we have a tipping point so massive that our stories of creation and prophecy don't make sense anymore,
right?
Or our stories of what we're meant to do. Like, if you ask any kid, how do you envision your life? We can't promise the futures that kids are told to imagine, and that is so detrimental to our generation in terms of how we can trust a system that is failing us over and over again.
So what gives you optimism then?
Yeah.
Because I know you can't give up, right? There's no going back. There's no sort of throwing up your hands and saying, oh, well, right? So what keeps you going? What gives you that optimism and hope?
There's 3 things that give me a lot of hope. The first thing is, I know people who have been doing this their whole lives. And I know that our ancestors have been protecting Mother Earth well before we knew how important the planetary health system was. And I want to be a good ancestor. I want to be able to tell my descendants, I did everything that I could. And that gives me a lot of hope that we will have thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who want to do that, who want to be good ancestors. The second thing that gives me hope is that we have never known as much as we know today on science. And in a way, indigenous wisdom is being now paralleled by Western science, for example, with the planetary boundaries, by saying everything is interconnected. The health of the system is holistic, and one boundary affects the other. So now that we know so much, I think we can act in a way that is unprecedented. And there's tipping points as well. There's positive feedback loops.
Positive tipping points as well. I love that.
And the third thing that gives me hope is that I know that nature always heals. We heal, nature heals. And if we just let nature be, life comes back. Life always comes back.
And it doesn't mean we have to give up every modern convenience. We don't have to, have life go back to what it was before modernization. But we have to do it in harmony with nature, right?
I think we have gone overboard with how much we think we can expect from the earth. And it is okay to say that we can, quote unquote, go back. But in reality, we're just settling into harmony and balance because we are out of bounds. We have reached 7 boundaries. The way in which we're living is not normal, and it should not be normalized.
Well, it's not sustainable for
sure. It's not sustainable. I mean, it's not sustainable. So
think about plastic pollution, or there's so many ways that we have gone beyond what the planet can actually tolerate. So we only have about a minute and a half left. So let me ask you the sort of ultimate question. You are standing in front of the COP president on behalf of the organizations and that you represent here and the young people that, whose voice you are speaking. What would you say to them about what needs to happen at this COP? What's urgent? What needs to be the result here?
If I was standing in front of the COP presidency, what I would say is it has been 30 years. I do not want to see a COP60. I do not even want to get to COP40. It is time that we actually put the frameworks of just transition, of climate finance into work, because we have gone too far. We have reached 1.5. We have to go back to the safe operating zone of the planet. And I think the planetary boundary line should be central in all of the decisions that governments and corporations and every institution take. And more than anything, I just ask that they love the future. that they love their children enough to be courageous to take the right decisions. And we have asked this so many times, I feel like we're running out of words.
Right.
And that is a problem because we cannot ever stop believing that change is possible. But
It is. It is. Just keep the faith.
And I've seen it. So that's why we're still pushing. That's why we're still making sure that we show up every time. Because if we don't show up, our voices are left out. So we will be here and we will be asking the COP presidency for justice, for workers, for future generations, for the global South. We deserve accessible finance, accessible technology to a just transition. And to uphold the rights of Indigenous peoples, of women, of youth and children across the world.
Thank you so much, Xiye. That was a great conversation. Appreciate it. Good luck this week at COP.
Thank you so much.
What an absolute pleasure to see Monica and Xiye together live from COP30 in the We Don't Have Time studio in the Blue Zone. Now I have coming in with me Dr. Jemilah Mahmood, Executive Director of the Sunway Center for Planetary Health, also my friend and colleague as part of the Global Commons Alliance. Thank you for joining us. I know you will physically be at COP next week, but I'm glad we could catch you via Zoom today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Sweta. Lovely to see you again.
So I want to start with an image that you've spoken about. It's a woman and her baby trapped in a tree during the floods in Mozambique, finally being pulled to safety. You've said that that moment changed everything for you. What did you feel when you saw that image, and how did it shape what came next for you?
So by training, I'm an obstetrician and gynecologist. So when I saw this image in the year 2000, I believe, of a woman clinging on to her newborn baby on a tree, and raging floodwaters below her, I asked myself, how is it that women are subjected to such indignity, and how courageous a mother can be in these times of distress? But what hit me was 19 years later, I was in Mozambique attending to a post-flood program, and I was talking to some of the midwives, recalling this image that I saw. And she pointed me to a child and said, well, his mother just gave birth in a tree during the recent flood. So I asked myself, what have I been doing as a humanitarian? Have I been putting Band-Aid on gaping wounds? We haven't addressed the underlying root causes of climate change and how the impact on women's health is so tremendous. And that, really moved me to, really focus on planetary health, looking at the linkages between the health of people and the health of the planet, and started my own organization in Malaysia and moving, policies and so forth so that we can protect human civilization and protect the planet.
Yeah, and these are all linked. And you are such a strong advocate for this nexus of health, of sustainability, the planet, and of women, of gender. And that's really why we started Scientista, was to give a platform for women's voices all the way from the global South to those who are operating in boardrooms, in the West. And we want to make that gap that much smaller so that women can really find camaraderie and can feel support in decisions that they make, whether locally on the ground or at multilateral levels, but really feel support from other women that they are leading with science and data and evidence, and for the purpose of furthering health and furthering environmental health. So, we talk about saving lives in disaster zones, and this is something I'm really curious to get your perspective on, because gender, right, is not necessarily the first thing that you think of. But again, these are all connected. So why do you believe having women doctors in the field changes outcomes and it changes communities' trust, especially during crises?
I think women doctors are really at an advantage, particularly in circumstances and some situations where women are actually shielded from society. So often they lose their agency, their voices are not heard. And in some cultures and communities, women doctors will have access to women that men don't have. And through that, we get to understand better what's going on. And we actually get to influence their husbands as well. So I've been working in, very complex disasters in Afghanistan and other parts of the world where women are often not seen. And this has been a great advantage to me. I think also women are empathetic by nature, not that men are not. But it's easier for us to negotiate very difficult circumstances, particularly even with authorities, using our own feministic approaches, which are more inclusive and gentle and so forth.
And what is the benefit of having that representation in addition to having women represented, that trust, all that you just mentioned? What does it mean for just equality and fairness, especially as we think about how these climate crises disproportionately are impacting women? We see examples of this all around the world as it relates to health, as it relates to environment, and how women are now responsible for ensuring the safety of their families, their communities. They're being looked to increasingly. So there's a fairness question here. There's a justice question here.
Yeah.
How do you think about that?
Yes, I think that, often when we talk about climate change, sometimes we forget the gender dimensions of climate change. Disasters and climate impacts are not gender neutral. I'll give you some examples. In India, there was a study of 800 women who are working outdoors, and they were 50% were exposed to occupational heat stress, which means higher than the threshold for safe manual work. And this study found that the miscarriage risk was actually double compared to women who were not exposed to that heat stress. So you're talking about women who, first of all, have to go out in the heat to work, often with no toilets readily available, no cooling stations, and therefore having a risk in their loss or pregnancy loss. And also, this was not only limited to the global south. It was also in Southern California, where they found that long-term heat exposure among women also increased birth complications, including stillbirths and preterm birth. So, and then across 33 countries in South and Central America, Asia, and Africa, they estimate that flood events may be responsible for about 107,000 pregnancy losses each year. So I think these are real, data. But behind this is a poor woman, struggling to put food on the table for her family, a precious pregnancy that's lost, the impact to her family, her community. And I think that we don't think enough about these gender dimensions of the impact of climate change.
This is a really striking statistic that you've raised from this Indian study. And thank you for explaining that, because I think it really it helps audiences visualize what we're talking about here. So I know you have many more examples of this. You've done incredible work in Malaysia, and Malaysia's also hit some really impressive milestones that you're hoping to see replicate and scale globally. Yeah. Can you talk to us about some of the work and advances that have happened in Malaysia as it relates to public health, and what you are hoping will serve as a example, as a something that we really could see work positively in other countries and other communities?
Well, the speaker before me, Xiye, was talking about how it's so important to live within planetary boundaries. Now, our center, which is 4 years old, advocated very strongly, and working with the Ministry of Science and the Academy of Science, have pushed to develop a national planetary health action plan, which is the first in the world. It has been released. It will be formally launched on the 20th of this month. And what it is a roadmap, a master plan on how we live within planetary boundaries. It means really a mindset shift, but also a different way of working that takes into consideration the different elements that affect the planetary boundaries, whether it's health or are affected by the planetary boundaries, health and environment. How do we grow our economies in a way that doesn't damage the planet further? How do we look at good governance? How do you look at the importance of education and research? Now, added to this, while this was being developed, the Malaysian Higher Education Blueprint that will be released next year has already mandated that planetary health and sustainability will be taught in every institution of higher learning And now the next step is K-12. It's also been approved that this will be introduced to children from kindergarten up to high school. So I think these are really positive steps. This is really a commitment, and also looking at developing our business models and our economy to shifting from a return of investment to return on values. That means thinking long term, thinking that profits should also be maximized to impact communities positively, health, social welfare, and so forth.
So you will be coming to COP next week, and you'll have an opportunity to engage with the participants from all over the world, the leaders who are here from the various nations at COP30. What is the message that you would like to leave them with? Obviously, all the advances that have been made in Malaysia as an example of what could be done elsewhere. What are you hoping that they take away from this shared information? What do you hope to see as an outcome of this COP30?
The first thing I want to see is, holding on to President Lula's COP of truth, that we face the realities that we are, challenged with, but also to recognize that we are winning. Solar energy, is now the renewable energy is fast surpassing fossil fuels. We just have to accelerate. We have to have hope. We have to think positively. And what we need to do is it has to happen at every level, not just at the top governments and decisions at the COP, but also at mayoral levels. We've seen that at community levels, and this requires everyone to have hands on deck. I would like to see real financial commitment to adaptation, but also to mitigation. I think we have to speak the truth that the fossil fuel industry must be held accountable and responsible for not just emissions, but all the health implications to people's lives. So let this be a COP of truth, but most importantly, let it be a COP of action.
And do you think, and I think I already know the answer to this, but I would love to hear you reiterate what I think the audience would appreciate hearing as well. Do you think we will be able to solve what we are dealing with? The face of uncertainty right now with how quickly we have surpassed the goals that we established for ourselves 10 years ago in Paris. Is there a possibility that we can still achieve what we set out for so many years ago? Is there a possibility to turn around those tipping points? Will the positive tipping points really be enough for us to have a sustainable existence on this planet? These are huge questions, but if there's anyone who can approach them with some depth and positivity, I believe it's you, Jemilah.
I think we don't have an option because, we have to accept that we are in very troubled waters right now. We have crossed some of the thresholds that are safe, but never have we had more knowledge and more money in the world than we have today. So now it requires commitment. It requires us to hold steadfast and believe that we can do this. And I think that this is not a utopian dream, but it is something that we do because it's the right thing to do. And we do have a responsibility to future generations.
And it's something very inherent in women, intrinsic in us to want to ensure that we protect our families and we protect our future families that may or may not even exist yet, but that we have that long-term view and we want to create a planet that is sustainable and can provide mutually for future generations. So thank you so much, Dr. Jemilah Mahmood, and for all the work that you do and for the work that you will continue to do and for being a true Scientista, a woman leader who inspires the next generations of Scientistas to come. Appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, Sweta. Such a pleasure.
Hello again, back here at Belém's COP30, and this interview is with Dr. Marina Romanello, who is the Executive Director of the Lancet Countdown on Health and Climate Change. She's an expert on how we're all being impacted by climate change in our health. So tell us about your recent report. You recently put out a new report on heat deaths, which had an amazing and shocking statistic that a person somewhere in the world, one person dies every minute because of excessive heat. So tell us, what did you think when you saw that number, and how did you come up with it?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me, particularly here at COP. That is such a momentous occasion.
It is.
The report that we just published is the latest report of the Lancet Countdown on Health and Climate Change, where we basically do an assessment of the state of the links between climate change and health. And as you rightly mentioned, one of the most striking findings in this year's report is that we, for the first time, have been able to quantify the deaths associated with heat exposure happening worldwide. And that has come with an enormous amount of work in terms of collecting data that oftentimes countries don't make readily available. So we've had to go country by country to try to assess.
Don't have a sophisticated way of even counting a heat death. They don't know it's a heat death because it doesn't present that way, right?
That's it. And oftentimes a heat death is not labeled as a heat death. It's a death,
heart attack.
Exactly, of someone that goes into the emergency department because they've had an exacerbation of some underlying health condition, like a heart condition, a respiratory condition, someone who has been pushed over the edge for heat, but perhaps it's not obvious to the naked eye that death would not have happened if it were not for the high temperatures.
Reported that way.
It doesn't get reported.
So it's very underreported. And how did you take that into account in this study?
So this study is based on an epidemiological model. So what we do is we look at deaths that happen at different days with different temperatures. And we look at that in each country. Each country has a different sensitivity to heat. Some countries are a bit more resilient, more prepared for heat day. Some countries are less prepared. So what we do is for each country, we assess that relationship between heat and mortality. And that allows us to generate epidemiological models that allows us to attribute.
So are you using AI to do that?
We don't use AI for this one in particular, but there's a lot of work happening in AI, and particularly when it comes to understanding that we don't yet do, but we're working on that. How many of those deaths are strictly related to human-made climate change?
Oh, wow. So really attribution science, which is always the key way to get people to really connect the dots.
That's it. But what we do know, for example, is that mortality for heat per 100,000 inhabitants has increased by 23%. We did per 100,000 inhabitants, which means that we're not capturing a change in population size. We're capturing a change in the rate of death.
The number of people who passed away
to heat exposure. And those, importantly, they're mostly evitable deaths so far. We know that today we could adapt very efficiently to extreme heat. But we are really, really late in adapting. We have not done nearly enough in terms of adaptation. And that means that people are left overexposed and unprotected from the higher temperatures.
And are there places, obviously, that are already really warm? This is here in Brazil, near the equator. But there are other places that maybe you wouldn't suspect as having these kinds of unaccounted for heat deaths. So talk about the distribution of the way this is impacting people in all various parts of the world.
Well, that's it. So we see heat-related mortality in every country. As you say, sometimes colder countries, we don't necessarily think about heat deaths. But for example, I now live in the UK. The UK is seeing per year roughly 2,000 deaths only during heat waves. So imagine what the whole burden of heat-related mortality is for the UK. And those are deaths that are happening because the UK is very unprepared. It's a traditionally
They don't have air conditioning.
Exactly.
And its climate is moderated, so it's not used to these extremes at all.
Used to the extremes. And houses in the UK have generally been built to trap heat. It's generally a colder country that has not ever seen 40 degrees like we saw in 2022, an unprecedented temperature that wasn't expected until the 2040s.
And people just aren't even acclimated to that, right? They don't have the ability. They're not used to that kind of heat stress.
And our behaviors are not prepared either.
Right.
So what we see in the UK often is that when there's a heat wave, people go out because obviously people in England love the summertime. But that type of heat exposure is very dangerous, particularly for elderly populations, which we have a lot in these types of countries, or populations, as we said, with underlying chronic health conditions that also are very prevalent in the UK. So even a country that you normally don't think directly associated with heat exposure is actually highly vulnerable and is increasingly suffering.
So this is a way in which climate change is an existential crisis if you're one of those people, but it's also an economic hit, isn't it? So talk about the economic dynamics of this extreme heat and what you found in the report?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's many dimensions, obviously, to every health impact. We know that people, when they get sick, they cannot go to work.
Right.
We also know that people that have an adverse health outcome will go to the health system, and that generates an increased expenditure on our health system. So it's also costing our healthcare services.
Right.
And one thing that we quantify in the report is perhaps a different aspect of this. That is the extent to which heat exposure is reducing people's labor capacity. We know that it reduces our intellectual and physical capacity to work.
Right. It's not even just hospital deaths or, hospitalizations and hospital costs. It's the economic hit of people not being able to work, literally not being able to work because it's too hot.
Or working more inefficiently.
Right.
And what we do is we quantify, again, we use epidemiological models to estimate how many hours of labor would have been lost because of heat exposure in different countries. And the number of the associated economic costs globally is staggering. For the first time in 2024, we estimate that the total economic losses globally due to labor capacity loss from heat exposure have reached for the first time $1 trillion globally. Global economy.
$1 trillion.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Oh my gosh.
And then if we look at who's affected, it's agricultural workers, it's construction workers, workers that sometimes wear public personal protective
gear, right?
And that they're
policemen,
doing
firemen,
work.
right?
That's it. They're doing manual labor, physical work, which means that their health is also at risk and they're highly vulnerable. And an agricultural worker in a low middle income country doesn't have air conditioning.
Right. They don't have air conditioning. There's no way to heat their or to cool their workplace.
That's it. So you end up losing labor hours, and that it's important to us, not only because of the economy, but it's people's livelihoods, it's people's income. And we all know that healthy economies, that good incomes, stable jobs are essential for good health.
Right.
And that is what we're saying.
So I will tell you, when I first started working on this issue of climate and health, the COP in Glasgow had the first ever health pavilion, a sort of a co-COP on health impacts of climate. And it was so exciting to see that happen. That was kind of a new thing. Tell us how it's showing up in this COP. How is health, because it's clearly a big issue back in the United States and probably in many, many countries around the world that are feeling these health impacts. How is the COP dealing with health issues?
Well, yeah, as you said, we kind of started seeing over the past 6 COPs, a big increase in the attention that we're giving in COP to health.
Yes.
What we always say is that what is being negotiating in these rooms, when we're talking about greenhouse gas emissions, when we're talking about adaptation, we're really negotiating about people's health and people's lives. Is how many hazards will people in every country be exposed to when the temperatures keep on increasing and climate keeps on changing? How much are we going to build the resilience to protect their health, to protect their livelihoods? So everything happening here is for us fundamentally about health.
Right.
And we see a lot of synergies between climate action and health action. For example, we know that reducing exposure to air pollution is incredibly good for health. And we know that today from our reports, we have about 2.5 million deaths happening every year because of exposure to fossil fuel-derived outdoor air pollution.
Deaths. That's another astonishing, avoidable deaths. Another astonishing figure. I can tell you, I got into this whole enterprise, this whole bit of work because my daughter had asthma. And I just see it in her.
And we have again, in the UK where I live, there's this example of little Ella, that was a kid who had a very severe form of asthma. And it has been determined that each time that she had an aggressive asthma attack was days of high levels of air pollution from road transport mostly. And she ended up sadly passing out because of an asthma attack.
Oh my God.
My mom is leading this enormous campaign to clean our air because of the health of
children. So she passed away because of an asthma.
She
passed away because of an asthma attack. That was what I lived in fear of. I have to say, it was really frightening when your child can't breathe. There is nothing more painful for a mother than watching that happen. And you only have so many tools at your disposal, especially in that moment.
Yeah.
So okay, now we've been down the hard road. Tell us some good news. Tell us something. I know you found some reason for optimism and hope, and we try to keep hope alive on this particular topic because we need to keep going and we can't lose hope. So tell us what you found.
Yeah, and it's both hope and evidence of the enormous potential that we have of life-saving action. So just to give you an example of what we've already seen that we've saved every year 160,000 lives because of reduced air pollution coming from the burning of coal. And those lives have been saved mostly in high-income countries that have transitioned away from coal and have cleaned up their air.
Right.
We still have a very, very long way to go, especially in supporting other countries, low-income countries, in having more equitable access to clean energy technologies. But that gives us such good evidence that even with the little that we've done so far, 160,000 lives we've saved every year because of
not burning coal. That's just an amazing, amazing statistic. So tell our moms out there who may be listening, what's the best thing they can do to help protect their children and their loved ones, their parents, people who might have a pre-existing condition of something that makes them more susceptible. What's the best thing they can do? What's your best advice as a doctor?
Yes, look, so there's a lot of things that we can do to protect our health, the health of our children from climate hazards. Air pollution is one of them. So we have tools at our disposal to reduce exposure to outdoor air pollution when that is really high. It's true that if you have a kid walking outside or you don't have filters for air quality at home, that becomes really difficult. And that's why it's so important that we demand our local decision makers to clean up our air, to prioritize health-centered transitions away from dirty fuel burning.
Clean air. It's
Clean
the most
air,
basic
it's so
thing.
basic.
Right. So moms have a lot of power, is what you're saying.
Powers. And you know what? There's nothing will stop a mom. That's what we've learned.
Nothing
will stop a mom.
That is so true.
And if we come together, and we've seen this example again, the little Ella and her mom have been powerhouses and has really advocated and achieved so much in terms of reduced air pollution in London. And that is such a good example. We also have great examples of warrior moms in India that are also advocating for better access to clean energy technologies.
Right, because they're cooking at home and over fire, essentially. They're cooking inside and breathing smoke all the time.
Exactly. Even the use of, leave alone fossil fuels, even the use of wood burning to meet energy needs could be replaced by clean energy and renewable energy access. And why are we still burning dirty fuel? 88%.
Why are we still burning trees?
88% of households in low human development index countries, the most vulnerable countries, still primarily depend on dirty fuels and technologies inside their homes. That is associated with over 2.3 million deaths from toxic air inside people's homes where people and children live.
Right.
That is absolutely unacceptable.
So these are all things that we can do. They're preventable. It's wonderful. What your work is bringing us is wonderful. And give us one more sort of way in which we can get, in which we can see the report. What else should people be looking for? Where can they find the Lancet Countdown report on climate change and health?
Well, we have it in lancetcountdown.org. So there you have our reports, you have data visualizations, we have a lot of resources that can make the data a bit more accessible for people. The report is free of access in the Lancet. You just have to register. It's a scientific report, so it's quite technical, but we have a lot more resources. And obviously, following us on social media in at Lancet Countdown, we always share their things in a bit of more of a digestible.
At Lancet Countdown, LANCET. It's the most prestigious medical journal out there. And thank you, Marina, so much for being here with us today, and keep up the great work here at COP. And thank you to We Don't Have Time for sharing their studio with us, for making this Scientista live podcast possible. We couldn't do it without you all. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.